And it looks like it's going. And hopefully that will be just fine. I'm going to have to give it a minute. It usually takes about 30 seconds for YouTube to catch up. And yeah, if this didn't work, well, it worked. We're good. Woohoo! I have pre-muted the stream, and so there shan't be any interference. If I could get a sound check, that would be great. I'm just trying, basically, sans headphones, because I heard it last time and it was bad. And I don't know if I can get around this, or if I'm gonna have to start directly streaming off of Discord, which seems, I guess, anything new to me is a bit intimidating. So, new streaming setup is just as intimidating as anything else, I suppose. All right, so this week there won't be and yeah, if anyone wants to come up, I'm looking at main stage chat. I may not check in the audience. If there's a hand up, I may miss it, so put it in the main stage if you want to come up. And we can make that happen. So where can we start today? There's a couple places, I guess. There's not too many people here now, so unless someone wants to come up and say hi and go into whatever topic, I'll just start with what we've been seeing this week in terms of conversations, which has been pretty fun for me. Probably spending too much time going into these conversations on the T-Jump server, but I love these kinds of conversations, especially when they get outside of the normal, like, heard it all before kind of, not this again, oh my gosh, like, how many times am I going to have to, you know what I mean, walk through the same kind of, what have you, it becomes, what do you want to call it, like, not redundant, but repetitive at some point, and I'm sure everyone can kind of relate to that who's had any experience with anything repetitive, like teaching, or you can even say any kind of job eventually does get a bit, excuse me, it gets a bit monotonous, the right word? All right, so where do we start off? Just the usual, I won't say awfulness, but it started off, I mean, it usually seems to be like saying people are trying to misunderstand each other, but it's a lot easier to descend into chaos than it is to ascend into a higher understanding. And so I can totally understand when, you know, that happens, and it's normal, but it does become a problem when the people who are doing it think that they're actually in the right and that they're like justified to do what they're doing from some sort of moral standpoint. And I get that vibe anytime basically I hear you should. Tinkle is asking what happened. I don't know what happened. Did something happen? I just had some chats on the T-Jump Discord server, various conversations, and now I'm talking about it on a stage, but it's not very well attended. So I don't know how long it's going to go on for with just me talking, but we do have someone who has agreed to come in 15 minutes called Easy Rider, who potentially wants to talk. So that might not be, you know, that might not just be this. So let's see. I had a thought, and I'd love to hear anyone's ideas on this if they agree or what. But the whole why. Well, you should know this. You should be able to know why you know what you know and how you know it. It's like, that's somehow not a word game, and then it sort of turns into a Loch Torrance thing where I think I sense it's bad faith. The other person probably also thinks that I'm being bad faith. But I'm just going to stop wherever I sense that there's a misunderstanding and just wait until it subsides. And that's pretty normal. Pretty normal, what do you want to call it? A normal pedagogical technique. Perfectly understandable. If one thinks about it, what's the point of coming to have a conversation? Well, either to learn or to teach or to shill your stuff, pretty much. So let's start with why, but somehow that makes me not a complete asshole troll. Waste of time. I think what they're trying to get to is they want you to embrace fallibilism because that's just, I don't know. I don't want to try to ascribe intention, but that does really seem to be the drill down. And until you yield to fallibilism, you are, I want to say a heretic, but when people are this rigid in their thinking and spend this much energy on, blank ops and whatever else you want to call it, non-philosophical endeavors, pretty clear that there's a serious, serious lack of understanding, which appears to come from this, well, really, I don't want to say the Socratic method because that's oversimplifying, but it's the idea that the person who's the teacher owes the student fanning their balls for all time. And that's what I call the Socratic fallacy because it's never been true. Not for the entire time that the Socratic method has been a thing. And Rome, I just don't know. I have to keep reminding people that Rome fell. It fell. And if you want to say that has nothing to do with the Socratic method, that's like saying, well, it had nothing to do with Christianity. It's like, well, what did it have anything to do with? Evidence, reason, clarity. That's what proper application of philosophy gives you. Trolling, what I can only describe as meanness. It just reminds me of high school kind of thing. That's not a sign that you're getting what philosophy is supposed to give out of it. And if you're super proud to be shoving your ignorance in other people's faces, I don't understand, I don't understand, I don't understand. Well, you're into the definitional self-reference problem, aren't you? Because nobody understands anything. We just have a memory base that we can all associate things in the memory base. Then to go past that is sort of, oh, now you're starting to invoke, well, how does the actual thought process work? Hard problem of consciousness. Now, if the hard problem of consciousness is not solvable in whatever form that it's posed, i.e. linguistic restriction, well, you're going to have a hard time with. It's hard to even explain what you're going to have a hard time with because I don't think anyone's actually used philosophy the way that it's meant to be used. The closest I can think of is people in physics talking about how the universe works or whatever, how going into sort of the nuts and bolts of the various theories of physical ideas that we were being taught. And because the classes weren't all the same profs and it wasn't all the same topic, we're able to go into a metaphysical regress of sorts where we could see how each subdomain of physics had a slightly different take on how to interpret the observables. And so you could argue, well, that's a philosophical question as regards implementation. And I don't think I'm the first to say that physicists are engaged in are to some extent engaged in what amounts to philosophy. But in my view, this is really not anywhere near what philosophy could be. So in a way, I know I'm doomed to have these misunderstandings. And so it's okay, I gotta have the mini misunderstandings so that I can draw out where the understanding is. I can understand where the conceptual gap is. And then I can simulate some data from my mind that will then be closer to where people are at in their own understanding. Cole thinks that their brain works in absolute harmony. Yes, so I don't think that anyone that ever asserted that was ever right. It's a bit of wishful thinking. And I think I recognize that both, or if that's you, Ethernet, nice to see you again. I haven't seen you in a while. And yeah, the other audience members that it's not me recording this, hi as well. Let's see here. So the why has no answer, and we want to sort of be able to say why it has no answer. And there's two ways I'd frame that: is definitional self-regress, or whatever you want to call it, where the definitions end up being self-referential. And if there's no way to calibrate them, which is what science does, hint, calibrating these circular definitions with verified, like observables where we've verified the meaning, that's where science pushes, or can potentially push, technology forward through this, basically shoving in its correction to our language errors that to some extent we can't help but make. We're doomed to make language errors if we're talking about absolute reality, because it's the same pretty much reason as why we're not analogous to computers. We had to build computers, and they didn't the first computer someone made didn't look like the Mac that I'm using right now. It was shit compared to it. It's extremely simple, but then we figured it out super fast. Kind of like that with biological evolution. So because it wasn't there at the quote beginning of the universe, asterisk, we know that's not really a thing, but the least complex version of the universe, that from the point of view of where we are, that it took quite a bit of time for humans to become what they are now. Same with it taking quite a bit of time to make computers, which pretty much ought to suggest that the bias of both of those systems is not the way the universe is in and of itself. We have already a distance between reality as it is in and of itself and our inner experience. And I think this is what solipsism is sort of trying to get to. The self is all that can be known to exist. Very poor wording there, but there is something to this. Always coming back to the remembrance that what we know is, from what we can tell, what we know is a consequence of our finitude. Knowing things. I'm going to talk about, words and using them and having definitions, knowing things. From what we can tell, is a result of our finitude. Therefore, to anthropomorphize the universe is counterproductive to the intention, one would think, of philosophy, which is to provide a framework for a deeper understanding. Or shit posting about what will happen if Elon Musk buys Twitter. So Tinkle's talking about right and left brain. Again, qualified dualism. Can we qualify a right brain, left brain dualism? Well, I'd say the burden of proof on that one hasn't been established by quite a long shot. So we'll maybe leave that there. I just want to adjust the see here. See if I can the next comment in. All right, so where do we get to? We have a simultaneous processing problems. And I had a combo earlier where I got to this point again where it's like, so what? So what? It's like there doesn't always have to be a so what. Sometimes you get to a point, lesson is sinks in, and then you can go in a lot of different directions. It's sort of on you what's interesting in terms of applying really whatever aspect of the technology you want. All right, so we've got definitional regress. Now, where are people at? Where's the average person at in terms of understanding? Like, forget about it. We can't get past stuff like the why thing not actually leading to anything remotely close to fallibilism. The why thing, eventually you need to conclude that not all mental structures are created equal, and to abstract, to become the arbiter of abstracted mental processes, sort of to become the agent of your own insanity in some sense. You can see where these things go. It's got to be a true dichotomy, like atheists speaking on a true dichotomy, speaking as regards to the goodness, the nature of God, does sound quite insane to me. If you deny, if you deny a concept has any legitimacy, to then say that it represents a true dichotomy in any sense other than the tautological one, I can't square that circle. People have their attachments. People have their attachments. Personally attacking you would be saying your name, but did I do that? No. The fact is that it probably, it maybe seems harsh sometimes, but the fact is that a lot of, like, no one's really standing out that much. I had a disagreement with my husband recently. It was like, there's not really anybody that stands out in particular as, quote, bad. Yeah, so what would be great is, you know, contributing and asking meaningful questions rather than constantly trolling. It's fun when it's a side dish. When it's the main dish, it just makes you look like a fucking subversive. All right, so definitional regress problem mixed with nobody can account for why science works equals you're not going to get to absolute definitions. You might get to a delusion that you're sharing a definition, and an echo chamber where you condescendingly attack other people and try to intimidate them into going along with what you're saying, but that's going to be about it. So if you go into definitional regress for anything other than to point out the issues with the self-referencing language and the fact that a dictionary doesn't tell you everything about civilization. What is the difference essentially between a dictionary and the culture from whence it came? Well, to answer that, you have to answer the hard problem of consciousness. You can't shy away from it, and you can't, there's really no way to circumvent it. You can try, but you're ultimately always going to be having to face that perfectly legitimate doctrines embraced panpsychism a long time ago. And to deny something as fundamental as panpsychism would undermine the foundation of the entire system. So the people who deny the panpsychism, I have to believe it's simply a misunderstanding on the level of semantics, not, or possibly a vestigial religious thing. It could very well be a Christian belief that is just really, really deeply held and needs someone who has a lot of experience to go in and pull it out from the root. Yeah, so Tinkle, you're saying, Some people have larger connection than average. There's a condition where both sides didn't split at all. And you're earlier talking about somehow knowing about autism and what it does to the brain. It's like that's not a settled science, quote unquote. And all of that stuff is going to be a brain first consciousness model, which doesn't account for the symmetry in the brain. So you're not talking about a high level of understanding. You're actually talking about probably a dangerously low level of understanding. And that's why you want to invoke practical philosophy, because there's a reason we have instincts. And our reason and our instincts, they won't always line up. There's really no reason that they would. But if you train yourself, they can. Imagine if your reason had power, your emotions. How might that be awesome? I'm going to go with yes. All right, so I still haven't heard any feedback about the sound, which I'm going to take as a really good sign. A really, really good sign. But especially the people on YouTube would be excellent if I could hear how the audio is doing. All right, so see how everyone's doing and not seeing too much going on in the chat, but all good. Let's see here. And no one's got their hand up or whatever, but if anyone does want to come up and have a chat, I'd be more than happy to. You know, poor Daryl. Well, you know, if Daryl's not going to come up, you know what that means? It probably means that it's someone we all know and love. But who? Who would be such a fucking dick? It's a mystery. Oh, well. Have to tune in next time on the next episode of the internet. But yeah, I do have a lot of really exciting stuff to talk about. I don't want to just like get sort of, the word is dégringoler in French, sort of means fall down the stairs, or partly part of that, but I don't want things to get too disorganized. If anyone is in contact with Easy Rider and wants to get hold of him to change the direction of this, I'm fine with that too, because you know, whatever, I could always stand to have a tiny drink here, so I'm a little bit parched. All right, so where does this all go? Trying to get the point across that when you're dealing with you're in a bit of a double bind, because you have to calibrate it on at least two levels. You have we're talking about just doing science here. We're talking about gathering data, which you get the data. You do a science experiment, you gather data. You validate, you don't validate. Cross-reference that. Through repeated meta-analysis of many scientific experiments, you start to get patterns. Then you start to talk about bigger things. That's, you know, theoretically where we're sort of, we're hoping how things would work if they were working. But when people can't give an account for something like as simple as definitional regress, how do we account for the intelligibility of language and the definitional regress problem? Because at first glance, those appear to be at odds. Are they truly at odds? Well, they can't be at odds, because the evidence, like, it's the whole point of being practical about philosophy, is that if the evidence is telling, even if it seems like it's a contradiction in your tiny ape brain, that doesn't mean that it isn't still an accurate representation of what's going on. So, quote unquote, empty fundamental essence of words / we still seem to be having a convo. So what the heck is going on? How do we square that circle? On some level, we're doing what the scientific method does in ourselves. And we still haven't figured the question out, but we know now that, well, we can get math to work, we can get science to work, kind of, we can figure out kind of what's going on outside enough not, we can find out what's going on outside of our own body enough not to like die instantly type thing. But that's it. So basically, where do we go from there? Well, I would suggest to attempt to find metaphysical primitives. What that means is something that you cannot remove from a system. Now, the good news is that I don't think, if you have access to enough systems, you can probably have to not use any one primitive at any one time. I don't know if that's if that's clear enough. I'm sorry if it's not, but you can sort of get around certain primitives. For example, physics, what I've come up with, and if people want to check out in the metaphysics channel, there's no consciousness in that at all. And I'll share it as well on the screen. You can get an understanding of the process of consciousness without actually directly studying consciousness. You don't need to directly study it. And in fact, most people never do. Most people will have the initiation. Oh my gosh, this is really hard to understand. I don't like this. And this is where you get the fork of people either give up or they keep going. But once you get an appreciation of the complexity of the problem, you're sympathetic to a model. It's just a question of what model. And you're not going to be thinking every dang day about what model you're using either. Like it's just not how it works. In order to get somewhere with philosophy, you have to undertake it as a practice, which means you're building up and building up and building up. So it's not always going to be, I want to go back to metaphysical primitives and build my entire system up from nothing. It's like, that's a process like any other process. You don't need to use it all the time. And why the heck would you want to give yourself the hardest conceptual load as possible? It's like, no, that's not the point of philosophy either, is not to feel, it's not like shove a bunch of computationally complex tasks down your own throat. No, the point is to delegate complex computation in a way that you don't lose the lesson, which is why I bring the emotions into it. If you can line your emotions up with your reason, then there's an integral understanding on the level of the body going on. And it's hard to do this practically because it involves maintaining what you might call a dissonant state, and a state of non-comfort associated with certainty. If you want to think about the good feeling of like a cozy bed and a family and love and all that stuff, well, it's the opposite of that. It's like the cold, oh my gosh, what is the meaning of it all? Blah, blah, blah. Let's not, cry too much, but we've got to face it that philosophy does sort of bring these questions up. Victoria says 10,000 more years of the scientific method. I don't know what that means. Tinkle just said the science of method acting. I definitely method act the what is it, the kooky scientist? And it's honestly because it's like, here's what I'm thinking. Like, I don't want any regrets when I die. And I figure option one, kooky, or option two, boring. And I'm thinking maybe there's like, maybe my success somehow hinges on the kookiness. That's how I see it. But yeah, so I'm not seeing a whole lot of questions in the chat here. I'm seeing, so yeah, maybe just save. Yeah, okay, cool. So like tag me if you have questions in the chat, or come on up on the stage if you feel like it. But you don't want to method act being an eccentric philosopher unless you complete the rule. Unless you can back up the rule, let's say. I see that both Darth and Daryl have been asked to come up, but they haven't, and I am sorry that talking to me hasn't been made more welcoming. Oh, what do you know? It is Daryl after all. You gonna unmute there? Or he's just gonna come up on the stage to say hi. We'll find out in just a moment. I don't know that anyone can, I don't think anyone on YouTube can see this.
Can you hear me now?
Daryl, you're real. I can hear you. Oh, is that going to be our whole combo, or?
Why did you invite me in?
I didn't. I think well, somebody on the stage invited you probably, but I wouldn't mind talking to you if you want to. Because like I would just really like for people to understand what it is that I'm saying, because I frankly don't think you're understanding much of what I'm saying. And I don't know if that's because you're just being stubborn and whatever, but if it's not that, then I wouldn't mind helping you understand. Yeah, I can't hear you if you're, I don't know if you're talking or what, or you don't feel like talking, or if there has been a bit of clicking on your end. So I don't know if you're trying to talk, but if you want to check,
You think I
there we
don't
go.
understand?
Sorry.
What do you think I don't understand?
Well, I mean, I just said I don't like, I mean, we went over this for how long in the chat. I don't mind read. So the burden of proof isn't on me to establish what you don't understand. The burden of proof is on you to demonstrate that you have understood. And when I talk about the parallel lines theorem not being something that could possibly represent reality, and that being something that I think is important, there you go. I don't think you've taken my point, and
I
don't
don't. You don't think I understand something? I'm asking you what you think I don't understand.
why the parallel lines theorem can't possibly represent a fundamental physical theorem on any level because it violates readily observable empirical data.
Empirical data does it violate?
First of all, are you a troll? Like, honestly, like, if this is just a troll thing, like, there's a lot of people shitposting in the chat, but are you, like, honestly serious?
You invited me on,
Are you
so I'm
serious?
just asking you a question. What
I'm
empirical
asking if you're
evidence?
I'm asking if you're serious.
Well, yes, of course I'm serious. Are you serious?
I'm very serious. I've been
Well, there
teaching
you
for
go. Well,
many
why don't
years,
you
and I
answer the
don't think
question?
you've been teaching that much anything very difficult as a subject. You may have taught some pencil pushing scum at your job, but you didn't actually teach anything substantial, if that's what you think that you're doing here to me. You have no clue the level on which you're like in commentaries insulting, frankly, sometimes. Like, I am glad we get to talk on voice because really, like, would be nice to get past this idea that you seem to think you know more than me about math and physics.
A question in there?
There's a question in there. Do you understand my argument about the parallel lines theorem? You gonna answer or what?
There is an argument in your parallel lines theorem.
It's not my parallel lines theorem. It's the parallel lines theorem. It's foundational to all of mathematics for the last 2,500 years. It's a bit confusing when people who claim to speak on behalf of math or math adjacent topics don't understand anything about the foundations of math. We're coming at it from basically the wrong perspective, and I attempt to correct this huge misapprehension about the construction of models, and I'm met with endless ridicule. I was sort of
Are you
asking,
referring to Euclidean fifth postulate?
parallel lines theorem is you can call it an axiom, you can call it a postulate, you can call it whatever you want. It's the notion of parallel lines. Yes, it's part of Euclidean geometry, but it's not necessarily exclusively part of Euclidean geometry. Someone in my chat thinks you're a bot. You could tell the audience a little bit about yourself, establish that you're not a bot or a troll talking through a voice changer or something crazy like that. I'm sure you'd never do that, right, Daryl? Completely coming in good faith. Need a little time,
You
Daryl?
invited me. I don't have to justify who I am.
Oh, I see how it is. So you can say anything, and because someone isn't willing to talk to you and expose you for the shit stirrer that you are, you now don't have to live up to absolutely anything. You can just be a constant drain on everyone's energy and insulting the person who's doing probably the best job at teaching anyone's ever seen. Now you're saying, why don't I understand the parallel lines theorem? It's like through your testimony, you don't understand how this is limiting understanding. Evidenced by the fact that you can't see the significance of my models, at least quantum foam can acknowledge that there's something to my models, and then I predicted the quantum periodic table. That's actually something. So, you, for all I can tell, just somebody I already know, pretending to be my friend on one side, me fucking hating my guts on the other, and now talking to me through a fucking voice changer. A lot of fun. Internet's a lot of fun. Yeah, funny meme there. Holy crap, that's a funny meme. Let's see if that's what I'm sharing on the. I'm sorry to get emotional, but it's like it's hard to have philosophical. It's hard to progress in understanding when there's this level of trollish, moronic, dumb-tastic shit going on. It's fun as a side dish. It's not fun as a. It's really not fun as the main dish. Do you have anything you wanted to talk about, Daryl? Like, I don't want to. Again, don't ask me to read your mind. Okay. If you say to me, what do I think about blank? It's like, that's not like, I'm not in the business of mind reading here. Okay. You've been actively participating in these discussions for a really long time. Do you now concede you have absolutely fuck all to contribute to them except for bullshit about how you don't understand because you're not willing to put the work in to understand extremely difficult aspects of consciousness physics that really nobody should have any expectation of understanding in any short amount of time? And that it would actually be sort of a sign of mental illness to think that you could understand that stuff quickly, or that someone could spoon feed it to you, as it would be completely unprecedented in all of human history. Anything to say there? Thinking of something there? Don't
You
have
seem
enough
a little upset,
sharpness?
Jim.
Don't have enough sharpness to come up with a retort? Gee, I wonder why. Probably something to do with being completely confused and being unwilling to learn and being sanctimonious and self-righteous and condescending and thinking you know better than fucking everyone. That about sum it up, Daryl?
You say so.
Okay. It is recorded. This is live on YouTube. I would adore to teach you something, Daryl, but you're not giving me enough information to show me where the misunderstanding is. You're just saying that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. That's wrong. And then you totally lost it about x equals x and not agreeing that that's vacuous. What are you even talking about? Mind telling me what that was about, Daryl?
X equals Y too.
No, that's why it seems like you're fucking troll. I don't think the people here know enough about science to know why you're a fucking troll. That's why I was trying to maybe get you to go into that a little bit, but I can't seem to get anything out of you because the only thing you want to do is nitpick at me. It's like, I already got a mother. You know what I mean? Are you there? Daryl, you got to work on the voice changer there? Got that all figured out or what?
Did you have a question? I'm waiting.
Ah. I have a bunch of questions. How do you evidence your knowledge of physics, you absolute troll dickhead?
Actual question.
Oh, so you concede you cannot evidence any knowledge of science. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for that. Why have you been constantly saying that you do understand science and talking about de Sitter spaces? That appeared to be just running away. A rather obvious point I was making was that I want to know if you
mentioned
actually,
de Sitter
stop for a
space.
second, do you actually understand why the parallel lines theorem contradicts entangled spacetime? Is the answer yes or no? Understand why that's a contradiction?
The answer is, if you explain it, I'll tell you whether I understand it or not.
No, so the answer is you don't understand it, and you would perhaps like me to explain it, okay? But you're being exceedingly rude and making it very hard for me to explain anything. Okay? So it's definitely true. The fact that you don't see that self-evidently is indicative that you have
I called
tons
you
of
a
stuff
dickhead
going on.
once yet.
Doesn't matter. You deserve my scorn. That's the thing. You deserve a lot worse than what I've given you. I'm being extremely kind to you. You're being a piece of shit towards me. I have a huge amount of knowledge. You have fuck all. You have nothing but arrogance. You have false pride. And yeah, I get tired of it because that's all I get from pretty much anyone in my life. Okay? It's exceedingly tiresome. All right? Let me talk you through this, okay? See if you can understand it. Question. What a perpendicular thing is that a function of what is a parallel thing? Asshole. Ask you a question. Is the definition of perpendicular dependent on the definition of parallel? TikTok. Anybody want to try to answer? I'll put it in the chat. So, is the definition, I mean, it's so obvious, right? 90 degrees, hint, hint. Is the definition of parallel dependent on the definition of perpendicular? So, I got that backwards. Let's see if anyone can answer, because if no one can answer, then it looks like nobody knows anything about math. And then I'm going to be wondering why everyone wants to talk about it as if they did know about it. Weird stuff. I'm going to put it in the chat here. Oh, Pluto says, Daryl sounds Australian or New Zealand. I think Daryl's a fucking troll trying to get on my nerves, and I guess it's working, right? Because my voice, you can hear I'm upset, right? I wouldn't be faking that, would I? It's not real. All right, so what do we got here in the chat? Let's see here. I have some yeses. Ooh, who put a yes? I got 3 yeses from Ziz, so thank you. And if Ziz would like to come up to say why, I would enjoy that if you want to. Obviously, I think community learning is important. I haven't actually thought this out, frankly. I've intuited it as well. I have not actually thought it out, okay? Don't actually have a ready to go answer because people like Daryl be cranky. And then I'm just like, all right, you want to be a troll? Play that game. I don't like it. I can play it. I don't want to play it. So let's hope that we can get past it. So let's look at what are the options. Maybe one thing quantum you could do for me would be to show that diagram that has the spherical and the hyperbolic and the Euclidean coordinates all beside each other. That would be helpful. That would, I think, show that the definition of parallel and perpendicular are dependent. Now, yeah, so Kevin says that Daryl doesn't sound very sincere. How do you respond to that, Daryl?
He's entitled to his opinion.
Okay, he's entitled to his opinion. You, what do you see as your role in these servers?
Maybe
I didn't hear you.
a visitor. What's your role?
You're talking a lot. Talking a lot for just a visitor. I mean, don't you think you're maybe more than a visitor?
Posting on a Discord server is somehow bad, is it?
Well, that would be what you call what do you call it? Socratic shuffle. Just wanted to establish that you don't have any authority. And that I'd be happy to teach you everything I know anytime, but that
The
you're
authority to do what, Jen?
You're intentionally to speak on any of these topics. You're intentionally not listening.
And what's your authority,
polluting,
Jen?
and then stop, and then polluting the commons.
What's your authority?
With your filth. And you're not the only one that does it, but I hope you can be a good example and start leading and stop doing it.
What's your authority, Jen?
How about start establishing some amount of understanding rather than trying to undermine what I
Is it a
know.
self-proclaimed authority? Is that what I need to do? I need to proclaim it?
You demonstrate it. Proclaiming one's own authority it's actually at best neutral. At worst, it's counterproductive. It's almost never good to proclaim your own authority. Unless people are being so unreasonable and lying and saying that they use logic but also lying, then it's okay, because then words have ceased having all meaning, and you're a bitch to not play that game if you do hold out on principle if your opponent doesn't hold principle. But I'm sure you already knew that due to your transcendental understanding of logic, Daryl, right?
Didn't you just proclaim your own authority?
I'm asking you to work up to understanding something rather than constantly trying to switch it around to a criticism on me.
Proclaim your authority. I'm just wondering what your justification for that was.
Now you're lying and saying that I proclaim my authority. What did I actually say? Claiming authority is not a good idea, generally, but demonstrating it is. So by your actions, do you demonstrate any understanding of the concepts that you use? I don't think so. Bubblegum says math is not the source of existence. It is merely a meta imposed by a higher being. I mean, we gotta start mind reading to even start answering that question, right? It becomes a matter of like, well, what did the Pythagoreans mean? You can start to speculate. I guess to me, it always comes back to what's the word? Numerology is the first step towards insanity. So as soon as you start like falling in love with numbers and you get the googly eyes about how pretty the numbers or the patterns or whatever. Oh no, the patterns and whatnot. It reminds me of a moth to a flame. So I mean, I enjoy those numerical coincidences and whatnot, but I have them classed in my pattern recognition system, if you will, as false positives that are vestigial. Oh, question in the chat for Daryl. Is 0.9999999 and so on equal to what? Going to answer sometime in the next 10 years there, Mr. Voice Modifier, because I don't like to have these huge things of dead air on my streams. Daryl, you there? Gotta Google something, Daryl? Yeah, so anyway, I'm interested in the 0.9 repeat equals 1 question, because I think it's the same as if, correct me if I'm wrong, but is it kind of the same as if dx equals 0? Dx isn't 0. So if dx isn't 0, how come 0.9 repeat is 1? That just occurred to me right now. I don't have an answer ready to go either, but back to the thing before about perpendicular being dependent on parallel. I guess I'm going to have to go find the spherical, Euclidean, and hyperbolic. Now, maybe there's other forms of geometry. Maybe there's an even better way of looking at this that isn't any of these things. So let's not make the mistake of getting wedded to any one system. The point is to really is maybe there's not one single point. Everybody's at a different part of their journey. Maybe the point is just realize where you are on that journey. Jen, how do you know Francophone being way up there? I don't know what way up there means, bro. I speak French because my family tradition. I'm sort of like semi, whatever you want to call old guard. I don't know. I forgot the word, but family history, blah, blah, blah. Colonialism. It was just everybody went to school in French just to basically not get left behind by the French Canadian culture. It's not my first language, but I'm fairly fluent. And then I got a chance to travel around, luckily, with my job, and got a chance to really practice in the European Frenches, which is great. All right, so people want to check in the main stage chat. Got 3 versions. So the parallel line in the non-Euclidean geometries, it's not the same thing. That there's the parallel lines thing's not a thing. Like if you can define a parallel line in these alternate geometries, it's not the same intuition as Euclidean because we have 2 important aspects of Euclidean line. It can be extended forever, and the distance is always the same between them. Sunflower says the beauty of point 9 repeating being 1 is that you're not allowed to use shorthands for infinity. But if they're equal, then you can use a shorthand. So square that circle for me, please. So it says you can either literally march on forever or reduce yourself to the next best thing. So, I mean, in my view, not every question is worth going into because if I'm going to talk about a question, I have to go through this estimation. And before I do, to be like, is this actually worth it from a pedagogical perspective? Does this actually help people learn? And is the risk of misunderstanding outweighing the possible reward of the learning? The argument here is in the chat and YouTube is as soon as you try to use a symbol to replace infinity, the thing you're modifying becomes finite. Right. So bridging the gap and conceiving of ideas, which reminds me of something I have been making notes about, is the absolute similarity between what are numerically really different concepts, which are one, infinity, and it's actually not even 0 because I have like a different conception. I don't say different conception of 0. I understand the current conception of 0, but this system I'm developing seems to necessitate there to be basically multiple zeros. So there has to be a redefinition of a 0 because right now we only have, I think we only have one. Feel free anyone to correct me if you want, but I am only really aware of one coherent definition of a 0 that we have access to right now. And I may just not be able to actually find my notes. I just got so many piles of them here, but I did make some about how in English, words associated with one, infinity, and what I'm going to call null are all conceptually adjacent to each other. Coincidence, intuition, history, who knows why, but when that's the case, and maybe it's just a thing, it's just here's why it might be inevitable. Okay, you have one thing, but you can't establish a boundary, but you're estimating a boundary. So you have a thing that is without a boundary, aka it's infinite. So it's not infinitely large, but it's infinite in that it doesn't have a finish. It doesn't have a boundary. Now, if we're going to call we're going to equate, if we equate unbounded to infinite, you can have a finite infinite, which can also be a 1. So there's this tremendous potential for confusion on the level of if you're thinking mathematically, that's a problem. So for me, a question like, does 0.9999 equal 1? Like, should we even be asking that question because we have this conflicting idea or near conflicting idea in calculus where, and that's literally the dx. dx is lim as number goes to 0. It's the smallest non-zero. So the difference between 0.9 repeat and 1, well, is that not a differential amount? It's a limit. So again, it's like, yeah, we need to understand that we have infinite limits for finite things. Infinitely large things represented with finite symbols. There's all sorts of things we're doing in math. It's like almost like math magic in a way. And if we fail to account for why, and arguably this has been happening since Pythagoras, we fail to account for why math works. And we get in these crazy thought experiments where our value assertion are unmoored from anything testable. So, Carol, do you know what happened at the Pythagorean cult? What they're known for?
Plus, do I know what happened in the Pythagorean cult?
Yeah.
No.
Well, they were really into the Pythagorean theorem.
Good for them.
Right, and does that have the parallel lines theorem in it?
Who knows? I don't know.
It does. You
Well,
said
good
you
for
understood
them.
math. You said you understood math and you could reverse engineer math with computers. So what was that? Just a lie or a joke or what?
I don't see what connection you're trying to make there, Jen.
The connection is that the Pythagorean theorem is defined relative to a right angle, which is defined relative to parallel lines, which is something that can be shown not exist in nature.
Therefore,
Therefore, no theorem have parallel lines as an axiom, which has been saying this for months, and you don't seem to understand that.
and therefore what?
Well, there isn't always a therefore. I just need to check that you actually understand what I've said.
So
Like,
it's just a
why
blind statement. You're just saying
you're acting like an assertion of fact.
cheesecake, therefore Mount
You
Everest.
don't set the conditions. You're acting like you want me to hypnotize you into identically following my worldview, and therefore, it's like, what would you like me to say? That's the
So you're
point.
making an argument along the lines of cheesecake, therefore Mount Everest.
Right. So maybe you can think about what you're saying and raise your hand when you're ready to actually contribute in a meaningful way. That was nonsensical. So if anyone wants to come up now, this would be awesome. We can talk whatever people want to go into. Maybe I can just do a little break right now if nobody's wants to come up and have a drink. Let's see here. Okay. So I've got someone in the audience who would like to come up. Kevin House, aka Knickknack. Hello. You'd like
Remember me?
to I want to say your PFP looks familiar, but not at the moment. Did you want to maybe say hi to the audience and we can get started with wherever you'd like to go?
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'm just Knickknack. I don't really know a whole lot about stuff, but I like to talk for some reason. So, I don't know. Like, basically, I've just been confused about um how infinity would be used in math. Like, um if or maybe not infinity. Like I understand that like infinity divided by like any finite number would be like infinity, or infinity minus any finite number would be infinity. Um, but like I guess what I get confused about is how like something could be never ending. Like that this concept of like never ending seems to be incoherent to me.
Oh, okay, I do remember who you are now. My bad.
Okay, you're good.
I'm sorry I said Kevin Kaus. I was like hovering over the wrong PFP. I'm so sorry. I see he's raised his hand, so yeah, you're welcome to come up, Kevin, too. Anyone else who can come up. But yeah, let's go back to what you said. First of all, you do have a background in math, right?
No, I do not.
Okay, I'm my bad. I'm just confusing. I'm back to not knowing who you are. Sorry. Okay, so let's just start here from infinity. There's more than one concept of infinity, even in math. Are you aware of that?
I think I've heard of that.
All right, so let's go over them. Let's start with the absolutely most incontrovertible version of infinity, which is the universal infinity. That would be a infinite size. As in, for whatever size you can think of, it's even bigger. Right, so that kind of connects to notions about mass, matter, things that we identify as having a spatial substance. I don't know if you would agree with that. I'm not saying that's the only definition, but I would call that perhaps the intuitive physical definition. Not even
So it's called It's called universal infinity, and it means it's always bigger. Just whatever you can think of, it's always bigger.
Oh, and the concept of size bigger. I mean the actual literal universe itself. Bigger in the sense that the universe doesn't have a boundary. In the sense that because we can't identify a boundary of the universe, it's infinite, and it's infinite because it contains everything. There's nothing beyond the universe that we have access to. So that's your infinite. That's the one that's actually really big, actually substantial, because we can say, well, we exist in an infinity. That doesn't mean that the mass is arbitrarily, or not arbitrarily, but extending forever in size, in mass. That doesn't mean that. It just means there's no boundary. And that's a really tricky thing, because we are very small compared to the size of the universe, even if it is finite. We probably can't conceive of it, or shouldn't try to conceive of it as infinite, because we're so many orders of magnitude smaller than it is. Sort of like a, does it matter if an ant thinks that they like it's like the ants probably believe in a pyramid Earth theory, and that's perfectly reasonable for the ants type thing. Not saying we're ants. I'm just saying that I don't know if my point was made there, but there's that infinity, and then there's the infinity of numbers, which is not the same thing. That's a sequence of points. You start with the naturals, so that has a dimensionality of 1. I'm saying that that's not the same concept as the cosmological infinity. And I don't know if you had a comment or if you would agree with that, that those are conceptually different.
I guess there is an important distinction to be made between like physical matter being infinitely big and numbers going infinitely forever.
I think
Is
you
that
could
what you're trying
argue.
to say?
Well, I'm saying that we need to distinguish it at least on the level of before we've made assumptions. Now, you could, if you want to, make an argument to say, well, you know what, R3 is a lot like moment in time. See what I did there? I said R3. That's a one type of infinity, or so. Sorry, R is one type of infinity. You know what I mean? The real numbers. I take R, it's the real number line, and I take 2 more copies of it, and I create R3, which is 3D. So then you can make an argument and say, well, R3, that is able to be mapped to a moment in time. I'm not standing behind that argument, but this is the sorts of arguments that physics or people who are interested in this sort of reasoning might try to make. Do you see what I'm saying?
Um,
Okay,
so
there might be a map. There might be a map between those infinities, but they're not conceptually the same, and we don't know what the map is at a priori. That's what I'm saying. Following? Did you follow that?
can I get a yes or no? So it's not the case that you're necessarily saying there's a distinction between matter being infinitely large and numbers being infinitely large.
I'm saying that the burden of proof is on the claimant, and that that's not self-evident, and that at least there's a distinction, because the best argument that I'm aware of is that R3 could be somehow isomorphic to a moment in time, and that therefore R couldn't be isomorphic to reality, because R is not isomorphic to R3. That was my implied sort of line of reasoning there, saying that if there is a correspondence between reality and a finite set of, or sorry, an infinite set of numbers, the burden of proof is on the claimant. I don't see how one could establish that, given what I just mentioned about R3 being isomorphic potentially to a moment in time, and B, I don't stand by that. I'm saying that's a hypothetical.
I don't know
But
what isomorphic means.
it's a much stronger hypothetical than what you're saying, which is that they could be the same. Saying, well, I mean, the burden of proof, right? You want to assert that they're the same. Okay, well, I'm saying we need to make this difference, this distinction, because clearly length and volume are not the same. To try to say that they are, to misunderstand the point of math, which is application to physics.
Oh, so length would be like numbers, and then volume would be like matter.
Exactly. But not quite, and we have to
Okay.
be okay, you're really close, but here's the thing, you don't wanna get lulled into a false sense of understanding here because our senses are really shit at understanding space and time. They're good at compressing it for our particular purposes, and we all agree because we're all humans. But reality is like we do arise from reality, but because we're so complex, quite far away from it's do you see what I mean? Like, we shouldn't think that the things we can conceive of and ought to bear correspondence to the fundamental level of reality. Something we may not even be able to, we don't know on what level we can conceive of the fundamental level of reality. So a lot of these conversations are to get people thinking in the direction that makes that fact self-evident. If that helps.
So are you saying that basically reality doesn't always conform to our understanding?
Why would it? Are you saying that it?
Yeah.
Are
Okay.
you saying that it
No,
does?
I'm not. I'm not necessarily saying that it does. I'm just asking if that's what you're saying.
What I'm saying is that our understanding is formed by reality in a way that our understanding is going to keep trying to trick us about what the truth of it is. And Kevin, I saw you unmuted, so if you want to pipe in with questions or comments, that now's a fine time.
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me. Is that
You're okay, but there is
uh,
a tiny bit of almost like you're in a reverberant environment, but we can understand you.
okay? Sorry. Is it more like saying that our minds kind of create individual conceptions of reality rather than one coherent one?
Yes. Sorry, I don't actually think I understood you. I don't want to misrepresent what you said. Maybe you could write it in the chat because yeah, did you hear him, Nick Nack?
I did not hear him.
Yeah, you're a bit low. Victoria, I'm
Oh
not
well,
sure what you mean by I would. Sorry. So if
sorry. When I say our understanding, I mean like our ability to understand. So our ability to understand reality, our ability to understand reality isn't always correct. Like our capacity to now I'm confusing myself.
you're doing a really good job, these things are really hard to talk about. I think what you're alluding to is what is the correspondence that the day-to-day experience of consciousness bears to the greater reality? How do we go from where we are now to model of aka a coherent integral understanding of what's going on out there, given that we're finite and it's infinite, and there's this like tantalizing simplicity and stuff like snowflakes and leaves, and you see the symmetry, and it's like, well, there's got to be something there, and have all this math scribbles, and I should be able to understand this. And this is sort of where it's very easy to get deceived by your own mind because your mind is serves that purpose. You ever heard about illusions of self in Eastern philosophy?
You mean like how we're all connected to like the universe or something, and how the universe is like all one or something? Or is that
That's not what I was thinking of. I mean, that is definitely a common interpretation, and I'm not saying that that's an incorrect interpretation, but no, that's not what I was thinking of when I said illusion of self. Um, yeah, so I can talk you through the reasoning. So step one is our consciousness is simulating the future for ourselves. What we experience is a simulation of the present and possibly the future and the past as well. And there's, residual, which is everything that's not that, which was fine. But, we don't talk about that now. We don't overcomplicate it. But model, simply put, is we're a future predicting and future present, past, and future simulator. Would you agree that that's a good description?
I don't really know what that means. Wait,
Well,
sorry, you said our
look in front of
consciousness.
yourself right now. Look around you right now. You're seeing something that isn't real, but it's a simulation of reality, i.e., it's made from reality, and your body's interpreted it to send you a perception of it.
So we are experiencing something, to
You
put it
are
simply.
experiencing something that is simulated based on what's really out there. Because what you're experiencing right now, like even you're looking around with your eyes, that's not really what's out there, but it's definitely connected to what's out there. It's extremely close in some way, in certain sense. It's very close to what's out there. And so far as it represents what's out there accurately enough that no one ever dies impaling themselves on a toothbrush type thing.
Hmm.
You understand what I'm saying,
I
right?
don't.
Like what
I
you're
think I get what
what
you're
you're
saying.
experiencing
So
right now.
like,
It's about a description. Is it accurate to describe the day-to-day conscious experience as a simulation of the greater reality and possibly also a simulation of future and past states of that experience?
so what you're trying to say is what we are experiencing is mostly true, is mostly accurate of reality.
No. It has the appearance of being mostly true, and it is putting a lot of energy into generating that illusion. And to transcend it, you have to recognize it as an illusion. That's where the mental training techniques come in. And I need you to, okay, I'm not saying you have to agree with my metaphor, but can you accept that it is accurate to describe our consciousness as a simulation of reality? Because we don't have access to reality, but it's made from reality, so it's simulated from reality. Fair enough? I'm not trying to trick you. I'm trying to explain this point here about the illusion of self.
Wait, sorry. So you're I don't I don't get what you're saying. Sorry.
Well, you know what a simulation is?
Yeah, so it's like the Matrix.
So where on what level was it a simulation? Like where would you say the simulation was in the Matrix?
Um on what level?
It was on a level of physical reality, right? Like people were actually branched into something that was a shared dream, basically. Okay. That's not what a simulation is. That's one particular example of a simulation. Sure, you can say, but it's more of a computer program. It's just iterating where Agent Smith says, well, this is the peak of your civilization. So it's like I guess you could say it's a simulation in that sense, but I'm looking for the most general understanding of simulation as in estimation, like the way MATLAB would make a sphere. If you told him your program is for math to make a sphere, well, that's a simulation of a sphere. It's not a real sphere. It is made on a template based on reality that we recognize. Go ahead, Kevin. I just saw you unmuted.
Yeah, I hope I'm better. I adjusted my mic settings and went to another room. So it sounds like maybe you just contradicted what I was about to say there, but it seemed like what you're saying is, the other key difference seems to be that the simulated reality in the Matrix obviously is not like the actual reality, whereas in our case, I didn't think you were quite saying that.
Yeah, that's why the matrix is not, we shouldn't use the matrix as a metaphor for simulation because the point of simulation, or we can call it a mirage or whatever, but the idea is that it is really, there is a similarity because it's made from it. So we'd say that our experience of consciousness is emergent from universal properties. And here's the argument. Okay, so what's happening is consciousness, day-to-day experience, that is a simulation both of the immediate environment as well as possible future past things and other things which we won't talk about. Let's just, for the sake, we'll grant it for the sake of argument and say that simulator is going to be better, going to be seeking to improve itself spontaneously. So you got to ask, well, what makes the simulator of future possibility better? Let's start with present. So simulator that only has access to the present, that's not great, because if something comes in the future or comes in the future and you didn't see it coming, that's no good. So present limits, and then you go to the future. The further you can go in the future in terms of your accurate simulations, the more you can have freedom to have your will manifest over others. So starting with the fundamental function of consciousness is to simulate future possibility. And we have to think about so many simulations of future possibility that it becomes necessary to sort them the way computers, I don't know if anyone's familiar with how computers work with search algorithms. So a lot of the times those algorithms will be awesome because the data is somehow pre-sorted. Okay. Is anybody following? Knick-knack, are you following at all?
No, I'm not tracking. Sorry.
You're kind of, I'm hearing you're kind of talking about a general database of information, and so it's all got to be stored somewhere, and they're kind of those.
No, there's no storage. It's a simulator. There's no storage because the simulator iterates the data in real time. It can't be stored if it's not necessarily stored if it's a simulation because the information is in the simulation. What I'm saying is that we can describe the function of our consciousness as a simulator of future possibility. Like, have you ever thought about future possibilities?
Yeah, all the time.
So when you do that, you're simulating future possibilities. And the reason they're a simulation is because they don't all come to fruition. If they all came to fruition, they wouldn't be simulations, but of course they don't, right? If they do, they're not in the same substance as what you were thinking of them as.
Wait, so a simulation is just a hypothetical thing that could have come true but didn't come true?
It's a hypothetical. Just think of it as hypothetical.
Oh, okay.
So what you're seeing is hypothetically reality. It isn't reality. It's your body's hypothesis about reality. And the first way we describe that hypothesis about reality is as a generant of a present state. We can all agree we are in a present moment right now. The simulator is primarily generating that. It's not exclusively generating that. It's generating future possibility, which we've agreed we can relate to that. We can relate to thinking about the future. So far, I'm not saying you have to agree. Is there anything about this that is just completely nonsensical?
Well, I mean, for the most part, it makes sense. But I go back to the kind of you're talking about the illusion of self, and I've listened to like Sam Harris on this quite a bit. I don't know if your theory is anywhere akin to his, but my problem with that is that in that hypothesis, there seems to be this idea that if you, Jen, Knick-knack, and I weren't having this conversation, that it never actually took place. Does that make sense? Like, if I weren't here, then this conversation never existed.
I'm sorry, but I haven't even gotten to the self stuff, and I wasn't going to get to the self stuff. I was just saying that as a reference in case someone else had already talked about this stuff. Self is one of the most abstract concepts you can go into. It's something you can start to get a bit of a feel for, like an intuition on how to use by listening to a lot of different people. So it's great to listen to people like you said, Sam Harris. I've heard what he said on free will, but not self. I'd love to look into that at some point. But yeah, very good to do meta-analysis on self. I just meant that as like a little asterisk in terms of it being the same problem, not wanting to necessarily end this line of reasoning with something to do with the self. It doesn't. It's a model for subjectivity. So the first step of the model is our subjectivity is simulating present and future possibility. Notice we have Big Daddy in the chat asking, why does a simulation need a conscious simulator? We're not even at that point yet. We haven't talked about consciousness. And I'm actually not saying that. not at that point. We're talking about intuitively the function of our consciousness, and it may be, and whether it may accurately be described as a simulation of the future and present and some other stuff. I was just wondering if people were following, namely the gentleman on the stage, and it seemed like maybe it was not totally incoherent.
No, I think it makes a degree of sense. I mean, I don't understand the mathematics particularly well, so I'm, kind of lost.
There's no math. There's no math. There's no math. It's just the concept of the hypothetical. There's no math involved.
Right.
Don't even worry about math. Like, I'm not thinking about math right now. I'm just talking, I'm thinking purely in abstract concepts here. Simulation in the purest sense of the term as a hypothetical. I know it sounds like a bit of a trick on words, but it is accurate. Go ahead.
I need to understand the concept to even know if it's coherent or not in the first place.
The
So,
coherence, understanding, those two things, they happen in tandem. So at first you have to familiarize yourself with the structure of an argument and determine its validity, I think, which is where we're at right now. So all I'm saying is we can functionally describe the process of consciousness as a simulation of the future. And when you get more advanced consciousness, there are so many concurrent future simulations that it is expedient to also simulate searcher, agent, go between the simulations. Why? Make decisions quickly based on tons of information. Unified integral processor. Enter. Anyone want to guess what I'm about to say? Finite self.
But before you get to the validity of an argument, you have to actually know what the argument is in the first place, right?
Well, again, this is sort of like you're not an expert on.
Yeah, I know.
Pedagogy. You're not an expert on pedagogy here. So you're asking what's the best way to teach someone something. It's like that depends to some extent on the person, but I do think anybody can benefit from at least glancing at the structure of an argument and being familiar with it, especially if one is going to disagree with it. Okay? So I'm not saying anyone here is necessarily.
I'm not saying that I agree with it or disagree with it. I'm just saying that well, yeah, I'm not saying that I necessarily disagree. I'm just sorry, what were you saying? Something about the simulation of the future, but I forgot the first part of the
It's a two-step proof, so I just didn't want to lose anyone on the first step. So I want to make sure that the first step was clear, which was that there's this simulation of future possibility, and the simulations become so complex because the consciousness is so advanced that it becomes expedient to impose or to additionally simulate an agent which can sort through all this data that these simulations
Sorry,
are generating.
so you said simulation of a future possibility, and then what was the next thing you said after that?
Well, the first step is just accepting that this is an accurate description. And it's not all our consciousness does, but it's accurate as something that it does. It's not the totality of it. Obviously, just saying that isn't like a transcendent model of consciousness, but it's maybe some sort of a bottom. Yeah, we can all sort of, even a dog is simulating present and future possibility. Wouldn't you agree?
I'm not trying to argue anything right now. I'm just trying to write down what you're saying.
That's step one of it. So step one of it is a simple model where we say that we're trying to say that consciousness is behaving not exact. Nobody believes that consciousness is exactly like this model, but we're saying it's a simplified version of how it works. And that it's not really something you can disagree with because it's accurate, but it's also vague enough that there's not really any room to disagree. So we're simulating future possibility. I don't really know what that means, but we can all agree that because what we're experiencing can't possibly be what's actually out there in reality because there's a body in the middle, we're going to shorthand that and say some kind of simulation. What's that? Possibility. Well, exactly, Big Daddy. That's my whole thing. You can interchange it. You can call approximation of future possibility simulation. Another thing you can use is superposition. You can use tons of different words. Words don't matter. It's the process, the process relation, that's the key thing. And then you can start to have everything unlock on the level of words. I don't want to think that meaning is tied up in words. It's in the process relations. So one of the chat said, once I figured out you could plan pretty much the whole game, it became boring. I haven't been following that chat, so I don't know what people are talking about, but sounds really interesting on YouTube anyway. Knack, were you about to say something? Sorry.
Sorry, can you hear me?
I can hear you now, but I wasn't hearing you earlier.
My headphones just died. Sorry. I don't know how I'm gonna.
You sound a lot
continue
better
on.
now.
I sound a lot better now.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah, barely. Hold on, let me switch my computer.
Awesome. Kevin, did you want to say something? Conversation has been challenging, but I'm really enjoying it, frankly. Because we may not be fully understanding each other, but we're having some communication. That's just wonderful to me. Let's see here. Okay. Want to come on back?
Okay, there we go. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, you sound good.
Okay, cool.
So step one, and maybe it's just too complicated, I don't know, but it's no problem. I don't mind going over this like a million times. I taught like basic math for 10 years, so it's fine. And it's really like, I don't want to say there's no stupid questions. I do think there are some dishonest questions, but virtually like, it's always better to ask a question than just be there like, because if you're unsure, you're not going to remember much. I know, because I can remember a lot, and it comes from being rooted in a certainty, and it's hard to wait a long time to be certain, and disheartening perhaps to realize that certainty is never complete, but it's a good place to reason from. So future simulation, we agree that that's what it's doing, and then we say that just the way, in the same manner that we design algorithms to improve searching in databases. So do you follow the argument to the point where the simulations of future possibility are becoming extremely complex because of how evolution drives more consciousness? Yeah, I can't hear you anymore. I don't know if you're talking.
Sorry, hold on. Future simulation of future possibility are becoming extremely complex because evolution drives. What did you say?
Well, fundamentally, what is evolution doing? It's increasing the efficacy with which energy is digested. Entropy. And so digesting it, the like reaction force, quote unquote, to that action is the generation of increasingly complex consciousness. And the evidence we have to point to that is evolution. You say like, okay, well, super complicated forms just didn't exist forever. The planet, for the whole time that the planet existed. That's all I'm saying. Does that make sense? That it's just a statement of evolutionary complexity?
I'm still confused. Wait, so
When a cell does it, like, do you know what a flagellum is?
I think I've heard of it.
It's like a squiggly thing coming off of of a single-celled organism. It's like a not an arm, but like a really, really primitive version of an arm almost. It's simulating adjacent possibilities. It's feeling around to see what's around it to help itself survive better. Anything alive is doing that. So, that's step one. And the
So
more
step
evolved something is, the more conscious it is, And you can look at like brain size and stuff like it is definitely. I guess I'm not sure how you could disagree with it. What I feel is a definition, but go ahead. I must be clear somehow.
Um,
You need a minute or
sorry, I'm getting distracted. My dad's here, and he's like, okay, future simulation of.
okay. So I'll talk about what Daryl's saying here for a minute. If you have certainty, there's no need for reason. It's never full certainty. I think you're I know I said infallibilism, ha ha ha, picking up off the fallibilism thing. It's the fallibilism one that gives the false perception of certainty. And it does become just dogma easily. So I don't actually think anybody has total certainty.
So what is?
Can't.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, I just want to finish real quick. You can't have total certainty. And if someone asks you why, you just say the Heisenberg uncertainty principle and you go on about your day. Go ahead, Nick.
What is efficacy?
It's like connected to efficiency or compared to other members of its class doing task that it does somehow better, shorter time, be whatever. There's just dependent on the criteria set by the experiment. So Ziz says effectiveness. Honestly, whatever word people want to use is fine with me. Kevin, I actually can't hear you, so I don't know if your mic is jacked up. So I haven't heard you talk for a while. But if you're trying to talk, you want to know if you're coming through. There will be a green light around your icon. Just look there, and that's lighting up. We can hear it now. I admit here if I used the wrong word. All I meant was the. Okay, like what's happening when you're digesting food? Why is that happening?
Well, yeah, you're trying to get energy.
It's happening because you happen spontaneously as a reaction to the conditions on the planet. And that's essentially a thermodynamic problem, which is described largely by equilibrium conditions. In other words, spontaneously, evolution is going to drive life forms to, on the bulk level, be more efficient digesting energy of food. Because there's always more energy coming in through the sun.
So you're saying that that um that somehow hypotheticals, like something that could happen in the future, is becoming, well, no, is something that could happen in the future is more and more complex, like the more evolution happens.
Spontaneously, we're going to get better at digesting energy because of thermodynamics, basically. Something called equilibrium. They're increasingly more efficient equilibrium generators. That's why the Earth pretty dang stable. There's a lot of craziness that happens in volcanoes and such, but compared to its total history, like in my opinion, there used to be huge bodies of water on the moon, and the evidence for that is you have these huge dugout-looking things, probably caved out by water. Back in the day, there would have been storms that would have actually spanned that entire distance. Yeah, it's gotten a lot calmer. Life has played a role in that. Daryl says, do I think evolution's role is to convert food into energy more efficiently? Well, food, yeah, I guess, yeah, you could call it food if you want to. I would say, like, convert high energy systems to the lowest possible energy. It will happen spontaneously, and it will improve its efficiency spontaneously. But we have to remember that it's not on the level of the individual. It is on the level of the bulk biomass, because we have instances of something like an elephant, and you look at the history of that. Okay? It could have gotten smaller. That doesn't mean that they aren't still on the level of all the elephants that existed, like in the change in the shape. Biomass, level on which the efficacy is improving is the biomass, is my point, not the individual. I don't know if, I'm sorry, I'm maybe a little tired here, but that makes sense. Like, it's not just the size of the individual, it's the total mass of the organism. Is that at all making some sense? Or yeah, if anyone wants to join us or chat, we'd love to have you. But
We were talking about infinity.
yeah,
And
we can go back to that if you want.
Okay. So you said to be careful to not confuse, to not necessarily say that there's a distinction between like length infinity and like volume infinity.
I'm saying that at some point we're going to have to invoke what you call metaphysical primacy and decide whether there's going to be unboundedness or a always having a next greatestness. That's your most fundamental definition of infinity, because sometimes those things are not compatible. And I don't think you need to marry to a rigid dogma, but understand where the strengths of relative approaches lie. So the first point with infinity was that there's the volumetric infinity, which I call the cosmological infinity, and that's just really to truncate what to me are unprofitable lines of dialogue. So cosmological infinity, then we have the sequence infinity, and then you could argue there's actually two of those if you're going to take a, I don't know, culturally relevant perspective and say, well, we should acknowledge math at least, and math defines two infinities. Are you familiar with that?
Oh, I think yeah, I think I've heard of math saying that there's like multiple infinities too.
So just to refresh people, we have Aleph naught, which is the naturals or the wholes. Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, or start at 0 or whatever. But that's just the actual. There's no number between 1 and 2 in the naturals. That's Aleph naught. And you have the rationals, which is all your terminating and periodic decimals that have a representation as a ratio of naturals. Still Aleph naught. Don't ask me to justify that. That's definitional in math. I'm just stating what it is. Okay, did you follow that?
Wait, sorry. So Aleph naught is the natural numbers, and then rational is.
Also Aleph naught. Now I understand that that may be counterintuitive. I agree it's counterintuitive. However, it's definitional based on, I think it's continuum hypothesis. Blah, blah, blah. Feel free to correct me, anyone.
Wait, hold on. Rational is a Aleph nod, but so rational is just defined as Aleph nod, so they're just like the same thing.
It's the same cardinality.
Wait,
So
what?
it wouldn't be the
I
same
I'm,
thing
I'm
because there's clearly you can find more elements per interval. Given any interval, compare the same interval in either system, you can always find more elements in the latter, correct? Because the rationals are infinite in a way that the naturals aren't, because you can always divide by 2 and get a new number. You know what I'm saying? No end to that. It's basically Zeno's paradox. Not a paradox, but that thought experiment, I guess.
Sorry, wait. I had to look up rational numbers.
It's no problem at all. I
Yeah.
mean, it's very good that you're actually following along rather than just trying to poke holes in things, because this is, to me, a lot more fun. I can tell you're actually, to some extent, following.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree. If you're going to say that it's not intuitive to equate those cardinalities, I'm not going to disagree with you. But I would say the argument is that it's basically axiomatic, and that's I don't want to. I'm not sure if it's the continuum hypothesis, but basically, they're definitionally exclude anything between aleph naught and aleph 1, and the cardinality of the rationals is not aleph 1 because the reals are like way more reals than rationals. So it's unclear to me why that argument holds for the rationals versus the reals and not for the naturals versus the rationals. I honestly think it's just a definitional thing. Daryl says infinity is just something without bounds. The universe is not bigger than big. Okay, I didn't say the universe was bigger than big. I said the cosmological infinity is conceived as for every big, there's a bigger big, and it's meant to be intuitively volumetric. I already established that nobody can establish whether the universe is truly infinite in the sense that you're alluding is simply unknowable. I'd really like to stop constantly having minor derailments on what isn't the point. So is it clear now? And maybe you don't understand why the rationals are aleph naught, and maybe you don't need to, and it's all good. But is that clear? And you agree with me?
I haven't really I mean, yeah, I think I trust you.
You can look it up. I could try to find a link here. So cardinality of rationals. Yeah, so I can just share that. A screenshot there. All right, so there's two, basically all that to say that there's two distinct infinities in math, and they're aleph naught and aleph 1. And those are both different than the cosmological infinity. So now we're at 3 infinities. Basically, this is just me building up the concepts of the necessary infinities. So far, you see how there's 3 different ones? If we want to include what's currently being used in math. And frankly, I think it is good to sort of integrate those concepts.
Wait, there's aleph nod, but then there's the rational infinities. Oh, which is the same thing as aleph nod. So that's just one.
I think the thing that's hard to get your head around at first is that the cardinality of the naturals and the rationals is the same. That's like, why would that be the case? And as I said, your counterproof, you could say for any interval larger than basically any interval, you can find more rationals than naturals in it. To
Yeah,
me, that
but
would be a proof that they don't have the same cardinality, but because of the structure of math, it defines infinity in a particular way. This is just how it works out.
I I think it does make sense to me why they'd be the same thing. Because infinity goes on forever.
It
So
has to do with
then
the fineness. It really have to do with parsing fineness. The parsing fineness, because you can count forever, the parsing fineness of naturals and the rationals is way more similar than the reals, which has this extra level of arbitrary precision, if you will. I don't know if that makes sense, but if I was going to explain it to someone who had no clue in math, that's kind of how I would put it.
well, I was just gonna say that it makes sense to me because infinity with rational numbers goes on forever, and infinity with natural numbers goes on forever. And if you just line them up, you can always have a same spot. Well, I don't.
I think you're maybe saying that you can order them.
Yeah, you can like no, but you can't really order rational numbers, can because they yeah, no, that doesn't really hold up actually.
What
I
you can
don't
do depends on what the rules are. It really is like a computer game that you design yourself. That's the whole point of these discourses, is to start treating math that way. Game theoretical sort of decomposition to actually, and this parallel lines thing's super important. Sorry to bring that up again, but because it's so integral, it's super important. But let's come back to infinity. So recapping, 3 types of infinity that conceptually are different. Size, Aleph naught, Aleph 1. What's the next definition of infinity we need to invoke? Can we justify? Do we need to justify additional definitions of infinity? I mean, I know what I think. But I want to know what Nick Nack thinks.
do we need to justify additional things of infinity?
I'm
What do you
asking, can we conceive of anything else that we would identify as being describable as infinity? Dog Pluto says countable infinity. Well, that is Aleph naught. We've already got the countable infinity in Aleph naught. Now, if you want to justify or attempt to justify a different kind of countable infinity, I'm open to hearing it. But what I'm looking for at this point is conceptually different definitions of what could arguably be said to be infinity. And we're at 3 now.
I guess I might argue that like well, at least okay, maybe I can't say this for everyone, but like for me, I can't conceptualize infinity. Like
No, nobody can. But you can agree
okay.
that based on our conceptions that we do have, because volume and length are different, the associated infinities that we agree we can't conceive of must also be different. That's the thing,
Yeah,
that
I
we can't
mean
really conceive of much, but we have the illusion that we're conceiving of stuff, and that was why I had my impersonal self example before, where I'm saying the impression that you are a single person is a simulation to help search through simulation faster, to simulate future possibility faster, more efficiently, excuse me. Mr. asks, is the Mandelbrot set countable? The Mandelbrot is, as far as I understand, an iteration of a fairly simple self-referential formula. An instantiation of which could be argued to be non-trivial self-reference. I haven't really talked about that too much in this, and I don't want to make anyone confused here. I want to as little confusion as possible. So, is there anything on the 3 different concepts of infinity that do you agree those are different concepts? Not about needing them or anything. Do you agree that they're different?
I guess what's confusing me is that like if we can't conceive of any of them, then how could they even like then a concept is only what you conceive of, and you don't conceive of these concepts, so the concepts don't exist. And
Question of
if
how
the
you
con
define existence. Because if you want to define existence as existence starts at me, cogito-centric existence, well, what exists depends on what you define to be existence. It's not good to get lost in the substance of thoughts too much. It's good to practice a lot of focus, but a lot of non-attachment at the same time, not get pulled into things.
I mean, yeah, I wouldn't say that like everything is like, just reality is just based on my whim, but I think that concepts are based or the concepts that I can understand are based on my whim. Like I know what concepts I understand and what concepts I don't.
You can only establish that you have a perception of understanding. I'm not saying it doesn't correspond to some demonstrably simulated process, but my point with the simulator or future possibility is that I could have told you, like, everybody thinks that that what you're thinking. That doesn't mean that it is the case that you know why you're thinking what you're thinking or how that works and all this other stuff, because everything in the mind is in a ephemeral almost.
Sorry, I didn't track that.
Shouldn't get lost in this. The question is, are there any other infinities? And the answer is yes, unbounded. Unbounded has no finish, has no closure, has no boundary. That is a definition of infinity that arises from the language, not from math. See what I'm saying?
Oh, okay, unbounded is like no start or no end, right?
Well, okay. People take balloons and fill them with water and throw them at people. Water balloons. Do you know what that is?
Water balloons, yeah.
So the boundary of that system is the
The boundary of that system. I don't
the
know what
balloon.
you.
Boundary of that system is a balloon.
I don't understand.
System is the water balloon, then the boundary is the balloon, and the inside is the water. Not a trick question.
Oh,
Just
okay, that's
I'm
what.
using like this is my definition. This is when I think infinity and I apply the concept of infinity, I'm using the finite infinity because I know that the infinite infinity, that's extremely hard to think, but I enjoy thinking about it. What I'll do, I'll just think for like, I don't want to say years, but very long time about just floating out in space. The
Wait,
infinity, cosmological one. But when I use infinity for the purposes of physics, etc., and teaching, I'm using the finite one. Why? Because I'm finite and I suck at thinking.
wait, a finite infinity?
I'm bounded. Okay, so you understand what I said about the water balloon, right? All that. So we got the boundary is the balloon. The system is the water plus the balloon. Following? You can see how the water has the same shape as the closure, aka the boundary.
Yeah, I mean, but I
You
would
can
just think
understand that.
that that's finite. That
That's a
it's not.
finite. That's finite and a bounded. That's a bounded finitude. The water balloon is an example of a bounded finitude. The boundary is the water balloon. The finitude is the fact that it doesn't go on to the end of the universe. Fair enough?
Yeah.
Bounded finitudes is what we can really conceive of easily. Apple. Yeah.
Okay.
You following that? So my example of what a bounded finitude is, now we haven't got to infinity yet, we're still at finity. Finite finity, we've got the boundary on the water and the water on the inside. Following that so far?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Have you ever seen those videos where people shoot a bullet through those things and then it pops the balloon, but it's still, you can still see the integrity of the water shape before it slowly falls?
I could imagine that.
You've
I
never
haven't
seen it,
seen.
like, I'm not saying doing it right now, but you might want to try it sometime because those videos are freaking awesome. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? Those videos make me so happy sometimes. And another one, cutting soap. Like, oh my God. It's so aesthetic. I can't even talk about it. But anyway. All right. So my point is we have been going through, my point is, dearest, that we've been going through different notions of infinity. And we are through a conversation with pals. We're discovering which versions of infinity are the most practical for conceiving of the problems that may invoke infinity or not, because once you see it for what it is, learning tool, a mnemonic device, and now it's like, okay, I have access to 4 of these mnemonic devices. This really then becomes a matter of determining how to use the strategic, the right use of these methods. So my point is that, so Knick-Knack, have you followed my example about the water balloon getting shot by the bullet, and then in that single instant when it pops, the shape of the water is identical to the shape of the boundary, less the, vibration of the bullet. You can conceive of that. I wonder if I can find a image of it.
Wait, sorry, can conceive of just the water balloon. Sorry, repeat that.
You should just find a video. 'Cause if you can't conceive of it, then it's like,
Well, I think I'm gonna be able to conceive of it if
Got
it's
it.
just like a finite thing.
I actually have a picture. Oh, hell yeah. You see it?
Is it in general?
It's in main stage chat. So the point is that this is a metaphor for reality, is that because of something called fundamental non-dualism, we can't tell, are we at the moment before the balloon popped or are we at the moment right after it popped? Like basically every boundary we invoke is necessarily synthetic on the level that people who looked into this really couldn't find non-synthetic boundaries.
So, wait,
The idea is that
sorry.
the water is infinite. The system of the balloon plus water is finite because the difference between finite and infinite is a boundary. It's not the sole definition. I'm saying like we're literally on the fourth definition of infinity. I'm not saying this is the only one. I'm saying it is a definition of infinity that comes out. Thank you very much, Doug Pluto. It comes out of the language itself, English. Non-finished, as in no finish, as in boundary. The example with the balloon is to show that because in the moment of popping of the boundary, the inside, closure of the inside is indistinguishable from the boundary. How would we know? We don't know where we are. It's the whole idea with that's why non-dualism is so hard, because we have our monkey minds imposing impressions of dualism everywhere we go. And everything's boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. That's all we can really identify, because fundamentally our consciousness is all about is contrast detection. And to speak of it in terms of contrast detection, well, that's perhaps good in a physics sense, but it's not intuitive unless you have a lot of practice with physics. So I instead say, well, even easier, more intuitive definition would be that our consciousness is a future simulation machine. We go on to like, what are we simulating, blah, blah, blah. And I guess one of the hard things to render in said simulation might be infinity. And so we have now 4 types of infinity. And I would then ask you, which of these would you consider to be the easiest to conceive of, i.e., like visualize or think about?
I I still haven't really. Wait, are you saying that the space is like infinitely divisible within the finite bound, and that's what makes it infinite? That's just like a wild guess.
No, we're talking about acceptable definitions of infinity. I'm saying that the contents of a bounded system, aka analogized as a water balloon, in the instant of destruction of the boundary is indistinguishable from the boundary system, and therefore we can't distinguish boundaries. Therefore, it is accurate to model a system in which a boundary cannot be established as infinite, because finite is the presence of a boundary. Just basically, I'll summarize it again here. I'm saying there's 4 definitions of infinity that arise, at least, that are different in English. The first is because of physics, cosmological infinity. The second 2 are because of math, Aleph naught and Aleph 1. And the third is because of the language itself, because infinity admits a definition as not forever bigger, but without boundary, which does not impose any type of conditions on size. That's what I've been getting at.
Wait, so without boundary does not impose any conditions on size. Okay, that makes. Yeah, that makes sense. But I'm still confused how there's a finite infinite.
Because all it means is without a boundary, and you can easily think of a system that's finite, it doesn't have a boundary. And you're such a system. You have no way to draw a boundary between yourself and universal consciousness. There isn't one. And that's
Well, I
my
guess
point, is you
I,
are
I,
one of these infinite systems. You're not infinitely large, but you're infinite in the sense that you don't have a boundary.
oh, okay. So like you're saying that like once the balloon pops, like the outside, the boundary goes away, but all the finite stuff is still there. So it's like finite and infinite at the same time.
Was meant
Like
to be an intuitive example of sometimes the difference between finite and infinite is a boundary, not never-endingness. Because a boundary is a type of never-endingness, but not the type that math builds intuition for. This subtle difference is what is one of the things that I think is important to get to. Because we're basically going through all the concepts that we could use and deciding which ones we're going to use based on a bunch of criteria that may vary based on the discipline in which they're being applied. So Swirly says, I hate conceiving infinity. I have to try and think of it 2 steps removed. Yeah, I guess I look at things process relationally. So whenever I'm using infinity, it's why. Why do I need this concept of infinity? Okay, I'll use it for the purpose. In math, you have limits that are defined as you could think of as a process with infinite steps. It's kind of like the Aleph-Nauten one, but a little different because we're looking at a theoretically infinite series, but then truncating it at a certain point. And only certain series are good and valuable because you can truncate them and get lop off 99% of the information within the first, n terms of an expansion, and so forth. So at this point, I would say, does anyone have any different concepts of infinity that aren't one of the first 4? Because I haven't spent a whole bunch of time thinking about this. I haven't framed the question this way yet. If anyone has any ideas, like I can't think of anything offhand, any other concepts of infinity that I can identify as actually different to these ones.
I don't.
Did that clear it up? Because my approach, like I can tell you how my mathematical system treats infinity if you want. It's an integral math and physics concept. So it would not be any of those concepts of infinity. It would be a new synthetic one. Hopefully intuitive one.
Wait, so there you have a 5th definition of infinity?
Yeah, well, mass acts instantaneously at a distance. And so it has infinite motion. Now, that's not an absolute truth. That's a language relative truth. It's unfalsifiable. It is not true that motion is defined on that level. This is pre-motion, but we access metaphysics through good metaphors. So we can really get a tangible understanding of how to apply it. So we're at the point of glad you've acknowledged that infinity is extremely hard to conceive of, because if you were, going to take the position to be like an Uber troll and say that it actually is easy to conceive of, I'm not even sure how I would deal with that at this point, because I'm thinking, eee. All right, so here's your rationalization. Step 1, mass, instantaneously interconnected, effectively has a velocity of infinity, even though that's not a thing. I describe it as infinite motion. Have the speed of light, c. So we could think of there being a slowing down between infinity and c, and then between c and 0. You might never get to 0. You know why you never get to 0 motion?
I do not.
Because a system with no motion would be at absolute zero. What that is?
No.
Absolute zero is no motion at all. When all molecular motion stops. And it would be when basically there's no temperature colder than that. That's like minus 270 something.
Oh, wow.
Something they've extrapolated with physics. But anyway, I can demonstrate to you why that state is unobservable, or you can just take my word for it. Doesn't matter, but that doesn't really have anything to do with the concept of infinity. That's more of a observer effect quantum mechanics thing. Want me to explain why that's unobservable, or want me to go to the infinity thing?
I think I might go. I'm getting really tired. Sorry.
Oh, no problem. It's been a great chat. Did you learn anything?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, maybe we can have another chat sometime, and yeah, hopefully talk to you soon.
Okay. All right. See you, Jen.
Bye. All right, so I don't know if anyone wants to come up, but yeah, if no one wants, if I don't see any hands raised, I'll just probably wrap it up soon. But I did have something cool-ish. Okay. Everyone wants to come up. Right. Found my thingy. There we go. I call this one the Kirby. Really reminds me of Kirby. That's in the main stage chat now. Yeah, I also love the notion of an intuitive infinity quite a bit. Mister. Hey, Kevin. Thanks for joining. I can't hear you right now. I don't know if you're talking or what. Did you anyway, I'll just give a little you're muted now, so I don't know if I didn't hear you prior to that. And yeah, as always, you can check to see if the green light's lighting up if you're talking. Unfortunately, I don't think my demonstration of my waveform reduction is coming up on OBS right now, which is, let's see if I can get this to work here. Oh yeah, there we go. Yeah, so Kevin, feel free to interject anytime. And if you want to know whether I can hear you, just check to see if your icon is lighting up in green. As it stands, I have not heard you yet. I've got a diagram for anyone who wants to check it out on the main stage. So Carol says that you can't achieve absolute zero because matter has inherent energy and you need a lower temperature to achieve a temperature. Well, that's only really knowing terrestrial thermodynamics. We can just limit ourselves to the conditions on Earth. We can really only speak to what's possible on Earth. And then to go past that, we've got to be really careful with certain de Sitter spaces and certain assumptions about space-time that are self-refuting. And if it's impossible to realize that because of certain reasons, that's a bad thing, if you know what I mean. I would say that I wouldn't even try to theoretically disprove it, because then you're in a thing, you can end up in a position where it sort of seems like you're manufacturing a language trick to get out of having to solve a problem, right? So you might be right that we can't create an absolute zero state. That doesn't mean that the universe couldn't, through some process that we never thought of. So I will just grant, basically, that maybe the absolute zero state could exist. So why wouldn't I grant that? yes, it is important to sort of be okay with limits. Not try to argue past those limits, even though it seems like it's a stronger position and actually a lot of times is less compelling. In a sense, people can smell desperation. This is how I would present it, though. I would say, let's grant that it's possible for the absolute zero state to exist. We're going to say we don't know how. It's not something we can reproduce, but due to the limitations of Earth, we're not just going to extrapolate that limitation onto the universe. That really doesn't do anything, but hypothetically, it's there. Now I want to validate that it's there. Yes, dog Pluto 0 Kelvin. I want to validate that it's there. I'm going to have to measure it to see what the temperature is. And that's where the problem comes in. Because the moment that I attempt to measure it, I am going to interfere with it. Measurement involves how interferometer, what amounts to an interferometer acting on a system. So Kevin, if you want to come back up, we didn't hear you the whole time, but maybe if you just restart Discord, sometimes that works if the audio sort of craps out. But, you know, as it were. So back to the thought experiment. Step one, we have this theoretically absolute zero system. So to validate that it exists by observing it, and we realize that in so doing, we have completely changed the system. And since it can't get less, can't get colder by definition, if it's changed, it has to get warmer. So if it's not where it started, here's the series of steps of reasoning. Starts at absolute zero, gets measured, or it gets interfered with through measurement. It's now different due to the observer effect. Can't be absolute zero. Can't be less than absolute zero. Therefore, must be more than absolute zero. Therefore, what we observed is the system that was at absolute zero transitioning to not absolute zero. We really can't tell where our rendering of that measurement starts and state of absolute zero that got measured stops. And Kevin, that's no problem. It's been a great combo and we can have another one another time. Like, I'm super happy with the number of people that showed up and all the encouragement. So I am happy to do this really anytime. I love these kinds of conversations, and I think we actually got somewhere today. Something like definitional self-reference too. I think a lot of the really foundational process relational stuff, if you don't have like a lot of experience, but you need one good impression sometimes for something to salient, memorable. So that's why I'm really hoping as many people as possible will participate in these combos. And as fun as I'm sure all the joking and stuff is, that is this a balance between serious inquiry and jokey times. I guess it's a good place to wrap it up. And thanks everyone for coming to the show. Talk to you not this Sunday, but next Sunday, if not sooner. Is that this Sunday we have a break and we can review for a Jewish festival. We'll be back after that. Looking forward to it. Bye for now.